and welcome to another episode of the Turn Up for What podcast, talking your Houston Texans straight from the Great British Isles. I'm delighted to say we are joined again this year by a man who needs no introduction from Draft Countdown, Mr. Shane P. Hallam. Shane, how you doing?
I'm doing good. Thanks for having me back, and we're getting close to the draft.
I said, yeah, I've not been anywhere near as on it as I was last year. In fact, I'm not on it at all, so I'm 100% relying on you. I'll admit that now. In terms of the draft, I had a full draft board last year. Watched thousands of games. Meant more hours than I'll ever get back. So I going through that process. Take my hat off to you. I respect the craft, respect the commitment. How have you found this process this year, piecing it together?
It's been interesting. It's been fun having quarterbacks that you feel good about actually in the first round, in the top of the first round. I think that's exciting compared to last year. But I've definitely found this class is a pretty deep, good class. Like I'm watching guys that are in my 30, 40, 50s of their positional rankings that won't get drafted. I'm like, I think this guy can make a roster. I think he can be in a camp. I think it's a deep group this year, especially running back, tight end, edge, corner. I think there's some good players out there. So I'd say a pretty solid draft for what we've had the past couple years.
Yeah, no, I think so. I think it's interesting, and as I said, my limited knowledge, I'll try and guide us through this, but hopefully Shane will give us an idea. As of today, Bryce Young is meant to be in the building right now, um, meeting with the team, with D'Amico Ryans. There's quite a lot of rumours as well today, Shane, about potential changes after the draft in Houston that's kind of swirling. I don't know if you've seen that at all, but I suppose when you bring a new head coach in who's probably coming with giving a lot of promises to take the job he did, which was a bit of a surprise and probably the best move the team's made. What do you make of those sort of rumours? Just to touch upon potential changes, there's no kind of concrete thoughts or predictions out there yet, but I suppose you probably see that every year in some buildings. They get through the draft process, and then there is resulting changes. May even just be structural throughout the organisation. But what do you make of that?
Look, I'm here in Pittsburgh, where that happened last year. They got through the draft, and then Kevin Colbert left as GM. I think a lot of teams, especially if you're replacing the head coach, you kind of get caught and you don't want to tear the whole structure down. You need a team in place for the draft. And if you're going to give the coach most of the power, the final decision, then I think then that's where you can have some front office changes. So I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. Where it's like, oh, this draft is going to fail because your GM or the person who has been in charge in the past isn't making the decisions. You have a team that you like and rely on. This is kind of the last thing for them to do if that is to happen. I think it's fine, and then I think it just tells you who is ultimately in charge in the room. And once again, similar to the Steelers, Mike Tomlin's calling the shots. He's calling who to take, and the Texans might ultimately be in that position now, where you brought, like you said, you brought in D'Amico Ryans, and you probably gave him some promises. He's probably the one that's gonna make the final call on these draft picks.
Yeah, I think so. And it'd be interesting to see it. It's weird. We obviously traded Deshaun, kind of moving away from that era. Casseri was given year one. This is year two of the 3 years of the first round bounty that we got back to move on. You would think if you let him start, you'd think he'd see all the way through. But hey, different things or stranger things have happened. So we'll see. We'll see where that one ends up, Shane. I think, but. Overall in this class, then how would you characterize this draft class? You kind of touched on a little bit there, but I don't know if there's any ones you could compare it to. I suppose we never know until they suit up at training camp and start playing games. But how would you, or as we stand today, we're a couple of weeks out, how would you characterize this 2023 draft class?
Yeah, I think it's a pretty good group as a whole. I mean, if I had to go back and compare it to a different draft class, probably be 2020, where we had kind of the Joe Burrow, Tua, Herbert. You had some quarterbacks at the top, some that you felt really good in, some that were question marks, but were going to still go high. You had an elite defensive talent in Chase Young. I think we have that in Will Anderson this year. And I think you had the offensive lineman and other defensive talents to kind of fill in the gaps. I think it's similar. You have Bryce Young and CJ Stroud, who I think are pretty rock solid quarterback prospects. Then you have question marks like Anthony Richardson and Will Levis. Where are they going to go? And ultimately, are they worth a high first round pick? Filtered in with a good defensive, offensive tackle draft in the first round. And like I mentioned before, I do think this draft is deep. I think rounds 3 and 4 are going to be pretty strong for teams. So teams with picks or a team like the Texans that have multiple picks. We're looking at that day 2 range. I think it's a good draft to have that draft capital.
Yeah, when you look back on, we spoke last year, and I think this is about the third or fourth year we've spoken about prior to the draft. But when you look back on last year, was there any guys that you were high on that came true, and also the inverse? Was there any guys that you missed on that you came back to when you sort of reflect on your evaluation from last year?
I think it's always tough when you're only looking at that year, first year. I'll say a player I was high on that I probably talked about on the show last year. I feel like I talked about him every year was Christian Watson, the receiver that ended up going to the Packers in round 2. I was pretty high on him. I thought when he got on the field, he ended up making a big impact. Felt like my evaluation, kind of hit itself and felt pretty good about it. Though I think I liked a guy like Trevor Penning, the offensive tackle that went to the Saints at 19, that really struggled last year.
Hmm.
And I think it's tough to evaluate, just after a rookie year. We've seen a lot of players need that year of development or go through some struggles and get better, but some of them often don't even make it. But no, I thought last year was a weird class because of the quarterbacks, and then we only had one in the first round, didn't have any in round 2. Is doesn't happen too often in a league where that really needs it. Luckily, this year won't be that way.
Yeah. And I suppose this class will be in ultimately will define the Texans as well, sitting in the dreaded second spot, which should never have been that way if it hadn't have been for that third and or fourth and 30 or whatever it was they went for in Indianapolis and Lovie Smith's parting gift. But how do you separate, or what would you say are the defining factors that differentiate Bryce Young from CJ Stroud?
I mean, the first thing that everyone's going to talk about is the size difference, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's one of the big differences when you just look at them. You have Stroud, who's just under 6'3", 215 pounds, and Brett, I think, was blessed to come in at over 200 at the combine. I don't think
Yeah.
he's going to play at over 200 pounds. Um, you know, I think that's the big difference between them when you look at them. I think from a playing standpoint, Stroud really, but I think both players really have great ball placement. I think Bryce Young does a better job kind of under pressure when the pressure is on of making plays than Stroud does. I don't think Stroud necessarily makes mistakes under pressure, but he can get a little bit flustered when that coverage is there and the pressure's on, like he did in the Northwestern game this year. So I think Bryce Young had a number of moments where he had ice in his veins, had to come back, had guys in the backfield, was making plays, moving out of the pocket, kept his eyes downfield. That's why NFL teams, I think, really like Bryce Young. I think Stroud's maybe a little bit safer. We saw the injury this past year with Bryce Young. That could be problematic. So, look, I have them back to back in my rankings. I have them as the number 2 and number 3 players in this class. I have Stroud just ahead of Young. I feel a little more confident and comfortable with him. But, Stroud did play with a future top 5 pick in Marvin Harrison. He played with Jackson Smith and Jigba is going to go in the first round. Bryce Young was playing with players that aren't going to play on Sundays this past year,
Mm.
which you don't expect from Alabama, but that was the case this past season. So, and still got it done. So I think I can understand why teams maybe have Young above Stroud. I think it's close, and I think if you get either one, you got to be happy.
Yeah, you think both can step into a team week one. Do you think that's well within the realms of possibility for both those guys to be ready in various guises in various systems, and the landing spot system I think is obviously going to determine a lot. I think bringing the Shanahan system over, for me, I kind of feel like sometimes actually if it is Stroud, he's probably more fixed, or he's the more accurate of the two in terms of his numbers. Albeit that's perhaps because he's had longer to throw and these guys are wider open. I don't know if you've looked into that at all, but I feel like which either way they go, if they are to go quarterback, there's been a lot of discussion about it the last few days. If they are to go quarterback, I think it will improve the team versus Davis Mills. I think that's safe to say.
Yeah, I think both those guys are ready to step in day one. I'm not sure there's any other quarterback in this class that I feel confident saying that about. And you know, I do see in that Shanahan system Bryce Young being a good fit. Like I think when we talk about ball placement and accuracy, I think both are toward the top of prospects that I've looked at and scouted over the past 20ish years. I think both are probably pretty darn good there. I think Young is a little bit more of a pinpoint placement so his receiver can get it. I think Stroud knows how to put the ball so the defense can't get it. And I would probably grade Young to slightly higher on the accuracy piece. Like you said, the numbers kind of justified. I think a lot of it is because of Stroud's wide receiver play, what they were able to do. But I think that's one area where Young probably has him just by a bit. So I think both guys can step in. I think the system that the Texans have can really fit. And we've seen in San Francisco, you don't need a world beating quarterback to get offensive production. So I think it's a good system where you can place one of these players who are good, still need some development to be great, and still get production while they're developing. I think it's ideal for that.
So we take Young for example. What would you say is obviously the size is the knock, but if you push that to one, nobody can change that. Certainly not him, even if he's got rocks in his pockets when he was weighing in at the combine, and didn't weigh his pro day. Interestingly enough, but what are the knocks on him, Shane? Because I've seen sort of arm strength played out there. I watched the Tennessee game when he was coming off that injury. He rolls to his left, throws on the move with a real degree of pace and accuracy for a touchdown on a sort of kind of scramble drill. So when you watch him, and he also has that it factor, I think, as well, that reminds me a bit of Deshaun Watson in a sense that he may have sort of periods or series of not necessarily world beating plays, but all of a sudden the switch flicks, and when it's time to make a play for his team, he comes through that clutch factor. So all the kind of things you see from him, I struggle to see like a major flaw in his game. But is there anything you think Bryce Young that could catch him out at the next level?
Like you, I don't think there's a major flaw outside of size that I'm like, oh, this is it. I think his footwork needs cleaned up sometimes. Like you mentioned, I think he can be quick to roll out even on plays that aren't designed for it. If he kind of feels that pressure a little bit, his feet will kind of break down, and that can lead to a little bit of inaccuracy, especially between the numbers and some of the medium areas. His arm strength is sufficient. I don't think it's out of this world, especially downfield passing. Sometimes he can short arm it a little bit, misjudge, maybe because of that footwork a little bit, doesn't get it quite on the spot where his receiver can kind of catch it and keep going. Um, and I think it was better 2 years ago, but he also had Jameson Williams, a first round pick. I think
Yeah.
helped, not having that. I think hurt him a little bit. And then I think just adjusting, looking off safeties is not something that he had to do too much or did too much. He goes through his progressions well. I think he reads the defense well, but he kind of takes what they give him, which is good. That's what I want from a quarterback. But he isn't on that high level of manipulation of the defense. It's small things for a prospect making this jump in level. It's nothing that raises big red flags to me.
Yeah. And in terms of CJ Stroud, I've seen people say he's not as coachable. He's got a bit of an edge to him. Obviously, he comes with the baggage of the same agent as Deshaun Watson's agent, David Magalera, who engineered an exit from multiple players, and I think people would be hesitant on him. Um, do you see a bigger potential set of flaws just because he may not be as battle tested playing for Ohio State? Albeit, I think everybody referenced the Georgia game where he started to use his wheels and he was running out of issues. And he kind of said when he was in front of the mic, I didn't have to because I was throwing to great receivers. And I think therein lies the point: was his need for structure too much to rule him out as a true playmaker that perhaps Bryce Young might be?
I think that's the big question, and I don't think it's just Stroud. Ryan Day, the coach there, also kind of tried to rein Justin Fields in. Didn't want him running, wanted him to pass more, and he was throwing to 3 first round picks. They're back at Ohio State. So I think I get it, but it would have been nice to see that beyond the Georgia game, because I think there were definitely games like Northwestern I referenced before where the pressure was coming, where we saw the receivers not getting open, and Stroud got frustrated, missed passes, and then he started running. And then the defense had to back off, and you saw it happen these couple moments. You're like, well, he could do it, but is it enough for me to feel comfortable? I think that's the big question.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And much of the discussion has been, and I heard Adam Schefter and many other people, and I think there's a lot of kind of spitballing this time of year. They've kind of talked the prospects to death. They've got to try and create some kind of allure and mystique about the draft and what might happen. And there's all kind of speculation. But certainly it's been intimated if Bryce Young goes one, the Texans may well pass on a quarterback because perhaps they're not as invested or fully bought in as they are when Bryce Young is CJ Stroud. Could you see a rationale for that? And could you see a potential avenue for not either trading out or potentially not picking CJ Stroud if he's left there?
I think it'd be a mistake. I could see them doing it. I think it'd be you'd have a regret on that going forward because nothing's guaranteed for next year, right?
Mm.
Now it's okay. Now we need a top pick. Either you're going to take a lesser quarterback at 12 or try to draft one on day two and hit. I think it's going to be much harder to do, or you're hoping next year to have another top pick and in this rebuild. And as we saw this year, it's not guaranteed. Like you
Mm.
can miss out, and now what do you do? Are you back to the same situation? So I think it'd be a mistake. I think Will Anderson is the best player in the draft. So I'd understand evaluating that, saying, okay, let's build this defense, get that impact player on defense who fits this defense really well, and let's go from there and fix the offense next year. Teams have done that. I think it's okay to do. But I think if you're staring at CJ Stroud, whether it be because the agent or whatever, that you're going to pass on him, if he turns into a great quarterback, I mean, it's going to be one of the biggest
Mm.
blunders in Texans history.
And there's been many of those, so
Fair,
we
fair,
can
fair
add to
enough.
the list. But I think yeah, I suppose that kind of wraps us up there. You touched on Anderson being your number one player. I think if you watch him in the year prior at Alabama, and we talked to guys from Alabama, obviously drafting Christian Harris and John Mechie last year, and we did touch upon him. I think obviously his numbers last year and his production far outweighed his final year at Bama. And when you watch him, and I think Darnell Wright's made himself a lot of money by that game tape because everybody keeps reference, probably the most referenced matchup in this draft process of evaluation this year. What do you put the first of all? What makes him your number one player, and what do you attribute the drop off in production? Because to me, watching him, Shane, I find sometimes that it looks like he's not as an explosive athlete as he was. The burst isn't quite there. He isn't quite reading things as quickly. And I don't know if that's injury. I don't know if that's attention, if that's scheme, what he's been asked to do. But how do you sum up Will Anderson those 2 points?
So what really gives him the edge to me as the number one player in this draft is that pass rush ability. I mean, you just don't get the multiple years of double digit sacks, and with him in the SEC without being a top player. I think the athleticism is there for him to kind of take advantage. Like you said, 2 years ago, we really saw the explosiveness. No one could stop him. I mean, that first step is deadly. I think it still is. I think this past season, I'll say, 10 sacks and 17 tackles for losses is pretty darn good. Like,
Mm.
I think the drop off is him going to from out of this world numbers to
Mm.
like really good numbers. And I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. I do think they asked him to do more. And I think that was the question. And part of it might have been for the draft was he started dropping back into coverage. He started stunting a little bit more. It wasn't just pin your ears back, go after the quarterback. And so I think he showed some versatility. But like you said, then there's a little more hesitation. Some of these plays where you're like, he could have gotten the sack or gotten the tackle for loss. They had him hesitate blitz. Like I think they were trying to have him do more things. I don't think it was necessarily helpful. But I thought he still played extremely well against pretty good competition. The Tennessee game maybe as the exception. So I'm still in. I think he's going to be a top tier pass rusher in the NFL, and I think you'll be able to use him in a lot of ways.
Yeah. And in terms of the comparators of previous classes of the first edge rusher going, it's the most premium position on the field out with quarterback. Where does he line up in terms of the Bosa's, Garrett's, all these kind of guys that have gone right in the top end of the draft? Where does he line up com- comparable to those guys for you?
I grade him higher than them.
Okay.
Now, I think the difference is, and why most people would say he's a step lower, is the size. He's not that Myles Garrett, huge base defensive end type. My comp for Will Anderson as a prospect is Von Miller. I mean, that's really what I
Okay.
saw. We've seen Von Miller have a Hall of Fame career, potentially. I think Anderson, because he's a stand-up pass rusher, is going to be an elite stand-up pass rusher. He's not what the Bosa's and the Myles Garrett are as kind of a base, put his hand down end. And that's why I think the Texans might be interested, because their system doesn't want those players as much. But we've seen Bosa have success there. We've also seen, guys have success in that defense, Alden Smith in the past, and players that stand up pass rushers because of the
Mm.
versatility. So I think he brings that versatility to the table. I think from an all around tools perspective, he can be, the best pass rusher in the NFL.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah, and I think there's an element of me. I think that we've got so many holes in these. I think yeah, there's this fine balance. I think Shane to be struck. I think whatever happens, there'll always be revisions of history, or revisions of evaluation, or the benefit of hindsight going back to this whatever Caserio or in fact D'Amico if he swings the decision to go. But I think it seems a difficult one, and I think it's made harder by not being at that top spot because you don't have the complete free reign of choice. So we'll see which way they go in a couple of weeks time, and I think it's gonna define Caserio's career, and it's going to define the franchise's direction. I think if they are to wait, Shane, how good is Mays? Is Caleb Williams? How good are we talking here? Is this another level above Strout and Bryce? Do you feel both those guys, or at least one of them, are a risk worth taking potentially with an extra first round pick in your pocket next year?
I mean, he's better than them as prospects. I think he was just more dynamic straight off the bat and showed it this year from a passing perspective, off balance. The arm, I think, is in an arm strength and zip are better. And I think he
Mm,
gives you more of that running threat than Young or Stroud do. Uh, so it kind of has that full package. Uh, I understand evaluating him like that. Now, a year's a long time for that evaluation to hold up,
mm,
right? Because I think we obviously said that about Young and Stroud last season, and now we're here, and it's like, yeah, they're great, but and I think Caleb Williams might get that treatment, right? He doesn't play as well as he did this past year, and now we have questions. Like I don't know if I think he'll stay as the number one overall pick, but I don't know if we're going to have that rock solid. This is one of the best prospects that we've seen in
mm,
10, 20 years kind of deal. I question if that will be the narrative when we have more time to pick them apart. But I do think he's worth trading up for. Like if the Texans do pass on a quarterback and get that opportunity, you better go up and get them. And it's going to cost a lot more than two first round picks.
mm. Well, yeah, well, that's it, and I think it's almost like the opportunity cost of not taking one now. Does that outweigh any position? A season where you might just stumble into 4 or 5 wins and be out with the realms of picking in that sort of top one, which you're going to have to be in, which even a really bad team is difficult under a coach who was kind of was a placeholder at best. So it's a strange predicament to be in with the rumblings of changes. It kind of feels almost in the front office feels a bit more uncertainty perhaps than it even did a week ago. But that's what keeps it interesting, Shane. But we'll see how it goes. But ultimately, the roster is built beyond the top few picks and in depth and quality. In your latest mock draft, you had the Texans taking Jackson Smith in Jigba. From my film study last year, I thought he was comparable or if not better than Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson last year watching the tape. Obviously had some injury problems with the history of taking Stingley last year and him not holding up healthy. I think health risk may be something they're a little bit more concerned about or cautious or considerate of this year. But if we take Smith and Jigba as a potential option at 12, how would you define him as a prospect?
I think he's tremendous. I think he's underrated at this point because of that hamstring injury last year. And I think injury wise, you don't have to worry as much because it was a hamstring. There's not really history of it. It's not a back injury like some like we have a Don Kincaid and some other prospects in this first round have some bigger injury concerns. I think the agility and ability to get open for him just makes him a rock solid receiving prospect. Even if he doesn't hit that ceiling, he's going to be a producer for you that can be the wide receiver one. The big question with JSN, I don't think is the agility. I don't even think is the athleticism and speed. It is he more than a slot receiver? That's what he played in college. We had those same questions with Justin Jefferson when he came out, was played the slot almost the entire time. It's a fair question. I think worst case you get an elite slot talent, and I think JSN, because he can beat press man coverage well, can play on the outside and can play it pretty well. I think a split end would be an ideal position for him. I think he could plug and play day one. But if it's not the case, you try him out there. It's not the case. Okay, we at least have this elite receiving talent that's going to get open Michael Thomas like in the slot, and I think that's what you need for a young quarterback.
Yeah, no, definitely, and I think I suppose it's where they see John Mechie coming off the lymphoma of last year, missing a lot of time. It wasn't in their plans. It hit their stock at wide receiver greatly, and I think when you think about trying to incorporate him and hopefully he will, because they will need him to come and contribute next year if they're going to have an active wide receiver core. Then potentially on the outside, but I suppose there is a number of players like Jefferson and Lockett and guys who have below your atypical size, but have managed to be productive on the perimeter. What skills do you think necessarily that Smith and Jigba? Is it the speed? Is it the separation, route running? What is it that gives them that elite trait that allows them to compensate for the lack of standardized measurables that people are looking for a boundary receiver?
I think it's the agility and explosiveness off of the line of scrimmage. Just when you have someone playing press man against him, it isn't that because he's in the slot and has options. It's like they can't get their hands on him before he's past them. And so
Mm.
when someone's trying to play press man, you are risking JSN just stepping one step, two steps wide open. And teams started backing off last year because they just couldn't do it. You saw in the Rose Bowl, they tried to press him the whole time because they were down corners. They couldn't, they had to, and man, he ate them apart. Like you just could not stop him when he had that. So I think that explosiveness, you put him on the outside. I mean, he still beats you in press man. He can beat you, and that's really the question you have on the outside. Now he can use the boundary to his advantage. I think that's what makes him a top 15 prospect in this class. And I think without the injury, I think we're talking about him in the top 10.
Yeah. And do you see him as the clear number one wide receiver in this class? Because there's a bit of debate of, I saw Jim Nagy tweet the other day. There's a disparity perhaps in terms of where the media and kind of general consensus and the public domain rates this wide receiver class in mock drafts versus where perhaps NFL teams. How do you view the class and in Jigba? Is he at the top of the tree for you?
I think he's a clear step above the rest. I do
Yeah,
think that there are a couple other receivers that I'd be willing to take in the first round. In that sense, I think when you look at the back end of the first, there's some good talents that have some upside. Quentin Johnson from TCU with the size and speed, or Jordan Addison from USC, who I think is just undersized but prototypical. And I think we'll see Zay Flowers from Boston College and his
yeah,
quick twitch ability go in the first round. So I think it's a strong group, but you don't have necessarily another top 20 option outside of JSN.
yeah. Okay. And at 12, if it's not wide receiver, who do you think, assuming say three, if not four, say Hendon Hooker or Richardson or somebody like that pushes the quarterbacks down and pushes the other positions down. What would be, in your eyes, the best case scenario of a guy falling to 12?
Yeah, I think if the Texans do go quarterback at 2 and don't take Will Anderson, then I think edge rusher would be an ideal position for 12. I really like Nolan Smith out of Georgia. I think if you want kind of Will Anderson light, I think Nolan Smith fits. 5-star recruit, number one in his class, incredible athlete. didn't quite have the production to match, had the injury this past year where I think maybe he could have ramped up into it. He has, a top 12 grade for me in this class. And so I think if he falls there and you're like, well, we like Will Anderson, end up getting Bryce Young or Stroud or whoever, we could take Nolan Smith and fit him where we thought Anderson would fit. And I think you can get similar production out of him with the good defensive coaching staff that the Texans have. So that's kind of the guy to me that I think would be you kind of hope for at 12.
Yeah. And in terms of the position or people that obviously sit 31 picks in the first round, Dolphins losing theirs for their meeting on a yacht with Tom Brady. But what sort of position groups do you think are strong enough, or certain players that you think are just on the cusp of that first round, second round that could potentially fall to 33? I think you got Will McDonald from Iowa State, I think, in your latest mock draft to the Texans, but from memory. But who do you see as a kind of clear kind of position group that will have enough depth that you could probably wait till the top of the second round, or is there guys who you think may just grade slightly short and still be good value at that spot?
Yeah, I mean, if they end up passing on edge rusher as a whole, I think it is a group where you can still get a Will McDonald or even a Keon White from Georgia Tech, Isaiah Foskey from Notre Dame, maybe in that second round. I think another group is the interior offensive line, the center position and guard
Mm.
position. I think that's going to line up nicely with the Texans if John Michael Schmitz, the center out of Minnesota, has gotten a little bit of first round buzz. I don't know if he's going to make it into the first. He could be a player that you take at 33, plug and play center right there. Steve Avila from TCU, Joe Tippmann from Wisconsin. I think there's a lot of
Mm.
centers right in that top end of the second round that could be good values and be able to be starters from day one with that being a need for the Texans. I think it might be a nice spot.
Yeah, yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's a key. I think with the fortification of the line, hopefully with Kenyon Green, hopefully making a step this year. There was some ugly moments last year, big time, and some welcome to the league kind of moments. But that the Shaq Mason trade, you think you could build a potential strength there for the team. But in terms of the kind of guys who may fall, the wide receivers, the undoubted bare spot on this roster. Beyond the kind of top end guys, who can you see this kind of mid round value? The wide receiver. I know you've got the Texans taking the Cincinnati wide receiver in your latest mock draft. I know he's a guy who's been kind of talked about as a sure handed, not going to necessarily wow you kind of guy, but he's going to be catch ability, sticky hands as they say. But who would you kind of point to him amongst others in terms of kind of mid round potential to fill that spot?
I think it's a nice day two group at wide receiver. Yeah, I like Tyler Scott from Cincinnati. I think he is kind of a Deontay Johnson, little lighter Deontay Johnson esque player where you can move him around a little bit and have that. And that's part of the issue. And we talked about slot receivers. There's a lot of undersized receivers. Marvin Mims from Oklahoma is another one who's, I think, getting pushed up the board, might be that third to fourth range that has production, has some of the deep threat ability, but has a lot of slot play. But I think when you look at the mid rounds, there is sub good, size players. A.T. Perry out of Wake Forest is an intriguing third to fourth round pick, had some production there in kind of a wonky system, a little bit light, but very long. If they're looking for an outside receiver, I think he's interesting. Rashee Rice from SMU, very productive, athletic, didn't have a big route tree where he had success at SMU. So, there's maybe some connection there down in Texas. Gets intriguing. Jaden Reed from Michigan State. I think there's a lot of players if, maybe even to double up like I had in my mock draft where the Texans say, okay, you have John Mechie, you have Nico Collins, but this could be a way to get a starter and get a second reserve rotational receiver later in the draft. Might make a lot of sense.
Yeah, no, no, absolutely. I think it's a spot we're going to have to address perhaps multiple times. I think with the trade of Brandon Cooks, Nico Collins not quite working out where they maybe thought he would do coming out of Michigan, trading up from in a couple of drafts ago, not realizing his potential staying healthy. So, who are your guys this year, Shane? That you're perhaps you think going under the radar, but you've got high views on.
I think some sleepers, probably the highest rated is Jonathan Mingo, the receiver from Mississippi. I really like him. Didn't quite have the production because of the system there, but big, strong, athletic, ran the ball a little bit, like did a little bit of everything. I think he's someone that could creep up into day two that's not getting a lot of buzz. Receiver wise, I also like Andre Yacivas, the receiver out of Princeton, who is kind of a track athlete, strong. It was just like a deep guy. 2 years ago, and then this past year really turned into a complete receiver. I think he's been kind of underrated and a sleeper in the process that could turn into the next Christian Watson type of player, but you're going to get him much cheaper. But I also like some other small school players. Joey Fisher from Shepherd is a guard who like super strong, plays low. He dominated his level of competition, allowed the running back there at Shepherd, Ronnie Brown, who I also like in this draft as an undrafted free agent, who's athletic and big, to get some space. And then Truman Jones, the edge rusher out of Harvard, is an interesting kind of smart technician with some strength. I think he's intriguing. So I think it's a good small school crop here
Mm.
in this draft. If you're looking for some late round picks, I think it's an area where the Texans could dip into.
Yeah, that's it. I think we're going to have to hit on, relatively speaking, on fifth, sixth, seventh round guys to try and build this roster as quick as possible and get us back to competitive. See if that is led by a quarterback. What we will know, as they say, the league will find you. But there's also guys who are brought into the league on pedigree, on school, on family ties, whatever it is that come in with a lot of hype and perhaps fail to live up to that. Is there any guys, Shane, who you just don't see what other people are seeing?
I think there's always a couple. I always when my evaluation is like drastically different from people, I was like, what am I missing? But I'll say Darnell Washington, the tight end from Georgia, who's getting a lot of publicity, first round hype because he's 6'7", 264, and he can block, but I don't want a blocking tight end in the first round. Like to me, it's not worth taking. I think it's such a good tight end class. I'd rather take Tucker Kraft of the South Dakota State as I have rated above him. I'd rather take Sam Laporta from Iowa. I think he's a player that I like more. So like Darnell Washington's a player that I don't quite get. One first round pick that I think is going to get overdrafted is Lucas Van Ness, the edge rusher out of
Okay.
Iowa. It could be an option for the Texans at 12. Didn't start for them. They kind of brought him in as a bigger pass rushing specialist, and he's good at that. He's strong and he can rush the passer, but like that's all he does. And that always scares me. I think
Mm.
there's been a lot of players that have gotten drafted as just they can rush the passer and that's it. Don't play the run. Like don't look for that. That's not
Mm.
how the defense is built. And I always shy away from those players. Sometimes I've missed there, but he's a player I think is a little bit overrated as well.
Yeah. No, I think Van Ness is a physical specimen. I think, but as you said, yeah, if you're going to take somebody in the top 12 like Texans are, they're going to have to play. And if they can't do the basics and match up to the run, then you're on a hide into nothing in a four-man front. I think that's for sure. What would you say are the kind of strongest kind of position groups of this year that you've been surprised about or that have potentially been stronger than previous years? Tight ends one you've touched upon. I've seen a lot on that. What are the kind of sort of top three depth position wise you think this year?
I think tight ends up there. I think corner is another one where, man, I look at corners and I like 15th, 16th, 17th ranked corner. I feel like the right system development could be a starter in the
Mm.
NFL. And that's rare that I'm getting that deep. Usually at 10, 11, 12, you start to fall off a little bit. But I think we could see, 10 corners go in the top 50 picks. I think it's possible. Teams need them, and it's a really deep group. There's a lot of possibilities for the first round in that cornerback group. I think it's a really strong position, and I think running back is a good position. Obviously, everyone knows about Bijan Robinson, the running back from Texas, who's going to go very high. But I think when we look at day two, you have players of all shapes and sizes that could potentially start. Zach Charbonnet, UCLA, Roshan Johnson, the backup to Bijan of
Mm.
Texas. I think he's going to be a better NFL player. I think he's going to be a starter in the league, even though he couldn't crack the starting lineup at Texas. You have kind of the smaller electric types like Jameer Gibbs out of Alabama, Devin Achane,
Mm.
Texas A&M. Like I think you're going to see some starting running backs come out of this group as we see some of the better ones aging out in the NFL. I think the Texans in day three, Damian Pierce had a really great year, but draft one of these running backs, get him someone to take the load off a little bit. I think could be helpful.
Yeah, I think so. They overran him last year. I think Damien. Then the fumbles kind of crept in a little bit at bad times, and he started to make some questionable decisions. And I think that was just workload that he simply just didn't see at Florida, and I think that caught up with him. So yeah, a compliment I think to Damien would be advisable for this team. In terms of the kind of the linebacker spot, that's probably one we haven't touched upon. Shane, is that a good year? We need to compliment Christian Harris. We've signed Denzel Perryman. We've signed Corey Littleton. None of these are long term solutions, but certainly we'll need to find somebody to complement Christian Harris. But who would you see as a good fit for this D'Amico scheme in this draft in terms of linebackers?
I think it's a pretty good linebacker group. We don't have the high end, first round picks, but that kind of bodes well for the Texans. I don't think you want to take an off ball linebacker in the top
Mm,
12 as it is. I really, probably my best fit for them is DeMarvion Overshawn, linebacker out
mm,
of Texas,
yeah.
round 3 area. Like he's a player who is instinctual, had a little more on his plate this past season and showed that he could do it. He could drop into pass coverage a little more, right? Do all those things that I think in D'Amico Ryan's system, you need a linebacker to kind of do a little bit of everything. And that's what Overshawn could do, but still was that good tackler up front to fill those gaps and do like what Fred Warner did for the 49ers. I think he's probably my best fit for them. I mean, I also like some of the second round guys, Jack Campbell from Iowa, who's kind of the big
Mm.
6'5", 249, stiff, but will hit you and can match up against tight ends guy, or Deion Henley from Washington State, who's a little bit smaller, but is so technically sound and is so good at diagnosing what the offense is doing and reacting to it. I think it's just a different flavor. I think Overshawn's kind of the best of both worlds and probably be a little more of a value pick.
Yeah, no, I think the Texans have had him in twice. I think top 30 visit and interview at the combine. So I think he's certainly one that will be on people's radar. So if you were to guess, and there's a lot of people trying to make a living out of this, particularly in Vegas. But how would you see night one panning out? What's your kind of prediction? What's your gut feel? I know you've got CJ Stroud going number one at Carolina. I think Carolina have played this show out, with aplomb. I think this year in terms of taking huge numbers to pro days. David Tepper walking into Nick Saban office and making that story, very well known. Well, how do you see this night one going? Because certainly I think the teams have done their part to create the circus that makes the draft what it is. But when you strip all that sort of bullshit back, how do you actually see this going, night one, in terms of that sort of first top 10?
Yeah, I mean, look, I might look really stupid here in a couple weeks, right? As it looks, but I do think the Panthers are going to take Stroud. I think it's who they probably want and feel like maybe this Bryce Young talk that's happening now is to try to entice the Texans to move up, which doesn't really make much sense from the Texans' perspective either way. Why would you let us just take your guy? So I think it goes Stroud, Young, 1 and 2. And then I do think we see Will Anderson go at 3. I think the Cardinals stick at 3. And I think if a team does move up, I don't think it's for a quarterback. I think that it's for Will Anderson. I think that might be the difference, that a lot of people just get quarterback crazy, right?
Mm,
And that's kind of what happens. The Colts are tough at 4 because I think Anthony Richardson, the quarterback from Florida, fits them and what they like to do. Before feels high to me in my evaluation of him. I mean,
mm,
I have him rated as a late first round pick, which I feel like I should stick to more. I should have last year with Malik Willis and
mm.
when everyone thought he was going to win in the first round. But I want to say the Colts take Richardson and we kind of see things end up from there. I think we see the 4 quarterbacks go in the first round at some point. I don't think we see Hendon Hooker make it into the first round. I think that's people just trying to push more quarterbacks as they always do every year. Yeah, but that's my sense. Like I said, I might look dumb and Bryce Young goes 1 and the Texans don't take a quarterback, but it just seems like Panthers and Texans are set up to take the top 2 quarterbacks on the board, and that's what happens.
Yeah, I guess it's a strange dilemma. I think as you go back and forth. I think as I said before, I think not taking one this year at the most important position. If you hit, fine. If you don't, then you're no worse off. I think you don't necessarily. Um, if you have to look to next year, but the cost to doing business next year is going to be potentially a lot greater than it is now because you have the certainty of that. As you said, it's all forecasted. In terms of a guy's stock that's dropped the most, Jalen Carter, where do you see him kind of dropping to, and do you think that's the bad pro day and all that kind of stuff all seems a bit kind of not necessarily staged or forced, but I think certainly from considering how good his tape was to, and it might just be unlucky circumstance we saw at the Laramie Tunsil, but he's kind of made up for that financially. But the Jalen Carter kind of fall off. Do you see him dropping that far, and how far did you rate his tape away from Anderson?
So I had in my last mock draft falling pretty far. I kind of want to just toy with the idea, see how it affected the draft. I think I'm probably going to pop him back up into the top 10. I do think like Seattle at 5, and then worst case, I think
Mm.
Atlanta, Chicago 8, 9. I think nine's probably Jalen Carter's floor. But character concerns is always tough because we can't know what the teams really think. They
Mm.
might say this isn't a big deal. It is a big deal. But yeah, I feel there are going to be teams that don't want him. I had him a step behind Will Anderson, just be really more positional value. I'd rather have the edge rusher than the interior defensive tackle.
Yeah.
And I thought the Ohio State game maybe showed some flaws in Carter's game. But I think he's definitely worthy. He's my number 4 player in the class, and I think belongs there talent wise. So I'm probably going to have him. I have a 7 round mock coming out on Monday. I'm probably going to have him going 5th to the Seahawks.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it's a strange one. I think because when you see like the flashes, and again, I'm only going on last year's tape, but when you were watching Walker up there, where you were watching his other teammates, the linebacker that went to Green Bay, etc. I think it was who's 88. I think that was the clear message of when he's coming out. So I think that was kind of a strange kind of a descension for him, but hopefully I think the car accident and all that kind of stuff's not necessarily going to impact him too badly. But certainly some bad life choices at a really key moment in your career that you've been working towards 20 years. It's funny how that can happen. In terms of players that you think, Shane, that will kind of like shock people in terms of relatively speaking, who's the kind of like early kind of day 2 guys that you talked about Christian Watson earlier. Is there any guys day 2? That's where the value of the draft is, and the Texans traded up a couple of times last year to get into that sweet spot where a lot of really quality starters are found on 4-year deals. Is there any guys in there you think that could potentially be stars that have just not quite polished themselves off at college, not had the exposure, not had the right system fit, etc.?
I'll give you a couple names. I think Cody Mock, the offensive lineman out of North Dakota State, is going to be a stud. He can play almost every position on the offensive line. Tough and more technically sound, I think, than Trevor Penning was last year. So especially if Mock goes to guard, I think he could be, a really really good player that goes round 2 and maybe ends up better than a Darnell Wright, someone that goes in round
Mm.
1. I also like Mozzie Smith, the defensive lineman, defensive tackle out of Michigan, who is pretty athletic. Didn't always have the production, got double teamed a lot at Michigan. So I think some teams maybe are writing him off. He kind of had first round buzz, and then he didn't do a full workout, but the couple pieces he did wasn't as good as people thought. Now he's fallen to round 2. I think he's one of the more talented defensive tackles in this class, who's getting underrated. So I think someone could get a steal with him. You're getting kind of a run stopper who also has some of the pass rush ability. Would be really interesting. And then, I'm gonna toss out corner Cam Smith from South Carolina, who once again another player. And I think this is where I like a lot of these players who got round 1 buzz early in the process, then for some reason just now aren't going to go there, and it's like they're still really talented. I think Cam Smith was a shutdown corner at South Carolina
Mm.
in the SEC, and because of bad defense or because this corner class is so good, someone's going to get a steal with him in the middle of the second round.
Yeah, no, I think there's a lot of guys, and I always try and like take the snapshot of the draft at the end of the previous year, before you get the declarations, and then right at the end of when the tape finishes, because I think it is that paralysis by analysis, and it can certainly knock guys off positions or skew evaluations, and it's all agent driven, the narrative a lot of the time, and you're seeing that with Lamar Jackson where he fell in the draft and not getting a contract. The power of that influence certainly impacts. But how do you think, if we're sitting here in a year's time, Shane, how do you think this draft class will be remembered?
I think like most draft classes, it's going to be, the quarterbacks at the top work out, right? I feel like that's how we look at a lot of these classes and evaluate how good they are. I think we're going to look back pretty fondly on this group. I think you're going to get a lot of starters. I think Young and Stroud will at least be serviceable enough to look good at those picks when the time comes, even if they're not Hall of Famers or Super Bowl winning quarterbacks or whatever. And I think there's enough premium positions that are going to be pretty good on the offensive line, edge rushers, corners, that I think we'll look back at this class and say, oh, this is pretty good. Do I think it's going to be one of the best of all time or, an all timer? Probably not. But I don't think it's going to be a complete, a waste where you're looking at 20 busts in the first round or anything like that. So I think it's going to
Yeah.
be on the higher end of what we recollect.
Yeah, nothing will ever be 2011 again. I don't think that's going to be hard to meet,
Yeah.
yeah, somewhere in between. Hopefully, the Texans can find two quality starters, whether that's a quarterback or not. That is the intrigue of night one. I think the draft will get very interesting very quickly this year, Shane. There is no lull like there has been, well, particularly last year, I suppose, with no kind of clear quarterbacks. It kind of took a while to get going, I think. But in terms of your kind of setup and traditions and all that kind of stuff, just live coverage. How you find your way through the weekend? What's the plans?
Draft Countdown, we're gonna be live streaming all 3 days, every single pick, every single round. A lot of people do live streams on that first day and first round. Maybe you get a little bit day two, but not many are there all day Saturday for day
Mm,
three. So when it's round five, round six, and you want evaluations of these players, you can check that out. Last year, I had watched every single player except one
great.
that was drafted. So I had something to say on everyone except one player.
Mm.
And this year I vow to know every single player that's drafted and be able to give you that immediately.
Yeah, no, I think that's it, isn't it? I always remember when Mike Mayock was still in the studio. I think it was the year that it was in Dallas, and a guy got picked from Minnesota, and everybody was flicking through their ring binders. Nobody had a clue who it was, so it happens. It happens every year to analysts, and it's a skill in itself remembering all the names and an inclination of who a lot of these guys are. For 256 3 days is a hell of a lot of work, and I always find day three Shane's my favorite day because it's quick fire, it comes in fast, and you get to see a lot of kind of rosters kind of built out pretty quickly over that day. So yeah, day three is always my favorite. That's what I'll be looking forward to. I would encourage everybody to come and check you guys out for some coverage as it goes on. But Shane, thank you very much for your time again, much appreciated. Apologies for the scheduling gaffe from myself, and we're a day later than we meant to be. But I've really enjoyed it. I think this is the third year in a row now we've done this. So thanks again. Hopefully we'll be back again next year speaking to you about some gold jacket type pickups. But we'll see. I think we need it. We need a star with Stingley not quite being there. Kenny Green still got a lot to prove. We need a day one hit. I think out of these top two picks this year.
No, so that sounds great. I appreciate you having me, and always happy to talk draft, man.
Yeah. Well, thanks to Shane for his time. Thanks again for listening. We'll be back one more week before, or another preview show before the real thing kicks off, in the end of this month. But thanks again to Shane for his time, and thanks again for listening to Turn for What podcast.